Oh, hi! You caught me being deceptive. Talk about being deceptive. What happens when you get Transformers good, G.I. Joe good, but Transformers and G.I. Joe bad? Today's Cobra Convergence episode is sponsored by TGC Customs. Now, if you're looking to ditch those Nerf guns Hasbro includes with classified figures, or mirror a character's vintage era accessories, go to TGC Customs Etsy store and upgrade now. Hello, and welcome to the next installment of Cobra Convergence. I'm Shabu RU for YouTube channel codename New202. This will mark the 4th time I've been a part of this wonderful event, and I am just honored and elated. Now, usually I cover modern comics, but when you have a theme of zany and weird things, elements of Cobra, there was only one thing that I could immediately pick up, and that was the 1993 Transformers G.I. Joe crossover event. Because it was such a big letdown, and I also want to put into I want to see that as the years has gone on, and we have seen many iterations of Transformers, because Transformers, unlike G.I. Joe, has just been turning on. We've seen the Michael Bay movies. So I think one of the things that hurt that crossover event was the year that it took place, 1993. I was in high school, and I was more concerned trying to make varsity in football than the things that I cherished as a child. And like many of you, whether in high school or college, we just moved on. That age gap, that demographic, that was the heartbeat of both G.I. Joes and Transformers had gone on. And at that time, I know my brother, who was probably the target audience and who was about 7 years younger than me, he was more into Ninja Turtles, Captain Planet, and all that other shit. So it was just a whole bunch of stuff that was stacked up against this story arc. Also, I went a few issues back and a few issues forward to get a better scope of, is this really as bad as we thought it was? Maybe there's something that we've missed over the years. So I decided to revisit this story arc and give it a thorough, proper reread, and to see if it still is a big letdown. And I was surprised to walk away with mixed feelings. Not so much like when you ask a fellow Gen Xer, the first reaction they get is a grimace, like, but after rereading it again, I see the plus and minuses. Maybe it's because, my profession was an auditor, a government auditor for 18 years. So I kind of like see the yin and yang. I've just been trained to do that. I look at pluses and negatives and try to find a comfortable medium. But I also wanted to ask someone who I totally look up to, who not only inspired me, but mentored me in the early days and still to this day. And that is Chris from Comic Tropes, to give his assessment and his reflection of this weird and zany story arc. So without further ado, let's dive in and get started in revisiting this. We're going to quickly breeze through it. I got some action figures that actually relate to it because those things were also, ironically, were as much of a disappointment as the comic arc itself. I mean, when you think about it, G2 Megatron was a big letdown from G1 Megatron. So it's kind of like weird that all of these things kind of like line up together. And maybe that's the reason why Hasbro has been kind of hesitant by combining both of their key franchises. And still to this day, we don't have, I mean, we had John Cena and that Bumblebee. That would have been a great place to put in G.I. Joe. There's been opportunities for Hasbro to do this, but for some reason, they just dropped the ball. And it doesn't make sense where there's a big market for G.I. Joe to become relevant in today's world with elements of diversity, skills. Women are able to do as much as the men. Anything from brown, white, yellow, everybody working together for a common good. G.I. Joe does have a place in today's world, and Hasbro, if you're listening, you need to amend that and show the world what a wonderful franchise G.I. Joe is. So without further ado, let's start recapping, just a quick breeze through as a refresher, and then we'll talk a little bit more about why this thing ended up being the way it is in our hearts and minds. Let's go. All right, so we really need to begin with issue 138. And right off the bat, the Snake Eyes logo taking precedent over the G.I. Joe logo was a big no-no to old school fans. And to this day, that kind of like makes old school fans chagrin seeing that. Of course, Ninja Force is taking precedent. This is in competition to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that stuff. We see Scarlet dealing with being a double agent. And here she is assumed that Hawk and Stalker were killed in an explosion in the previous episode. And she's having to live with that, oh my gosh, doing the unthinkable and carrying forward with the mission. We learn that Destro and Baroness are on the run within the Silent Castle, aka Castle del Destro, as they are on the opposite side of Cobra. So they're running for their lives. We also see Dr. Biggles-Jones, who we did an earlier episode on when we looked at her very tough to find G.I. Joe Club action figure with her railgun and those wonderful leotard and lab coat outfit. So we see here Destro and the Baroness trying to make their way to the extraction point because they've already contacted G.I. Joe, which are going to help extract them in exchange for vital information. You know that deal. We also see a three-way catfight between Scarlet, Biggles-Jones, and Zorana, who at the time broke away from the Dreadnoks and is kind of Cobra Commander's new squeeze / right-hand lady. Now, each woman belittling, discrediting the other at every opportunity. Now, notice the artwork, as this was the height of the Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld era of drawing female characters with unreal, super slim waists and huge boobs. Now, Andrew Whitman is the artist for this particular issue, but during the 4 issues of G.I. Joe and 2 in Transformers Generation 2, there were a multitude of artists, and you could see they're trying to fit into a particular mold. Now, the other thing, and really important thing that got overlooked back in the 90s, but I could see now covering the modern IDW run, is what a dick Hawk is. Hawk purposely withheld the information to Snake Eyes about Scarlet being a double agent. That's his girl, right? And then number 2, he tells them to extract Destro, but to not let Scarlet know that both Hawk and Stalker are still alive. So he wants to withhold that information from her and treat her as if she's the enemy. Don't hold back, because that'll give away her position as a double agent. And that's what makes this story arc really good. Deception. That people will use you for their own personal interests. They'll use you, chew you up, and spit you out unless you're on your toes. That's the whole meat and potatoes that got overlooked, but is actually really good about this story arc. And here we see the unthinkable, Snake Eyes stabbing Scarlet, but again, the theme of deception. He knew that the only way to fully get out of this situation is to stab Scarlet, but he does it in such a way that actually saves her life. And we see Hawk, the dickhead that he is, like confronting Snake Eyes about what he did and if Scarlet knows anything. Like that's all he cares about. And again, like covering the modern IDW run, we saw that in the Silent Options storyline of him using a little girl Helix to be a weapon. And of course, Megatron arrives at the Silent Castle looking for a Decepticon. So you see what I mean when you have to go a little bit back in order to get a better perspective of the actual story arc, because those are really crucial elements that kind of changes things a little bit with your perception. It doesn't save it totally, but it makes it more palatable going forward. And I also think that at the time, this is a really big thing, that we were so fixed on Generation 1 that when you saw G2, like for a lot of us old school guys that heard about this, it kind of came back just for a brief second to revisit our beloved G.I. Joe and Transformers and saw this, like this different version of Megatron, as we're going to see in the next issue. It really was disheartening. Like, that's not my Megatron. That's not my G.I. Joe. That's what we came and why this arc was so effective negatively is those elements as well that we brought with us when we saw this and that we still hold to this day. But because of Transformers, and there's so many, like we have kids, their Transformers are different from ours. And it's just that now we're getting accustomed to different Transformers. So that part may have changed, but again, it doesn't save it, but it makes things more palatable going forward. So let's go to the next issue. We begin with issue 139. Now, Chris Batista takes over art duties over Andrew Whitman's. Now, we see a tattered, beat-up Megatron's arrival and assault on the Silent Castle. His sensors picking up a massive transformation, which was the Silent Castle going between its two settings during Destro and Baroness's escape. Outraged that he exerted all that energy coming from Canada, thinking the transformation was conducted by a fellow Decepticon in hiding, he takes out his anger on Cobra. Biggles-Jones realizes that her railgun is actually a match versus this alien technology, so she mounts her railgun on top of a HISS tank and is able to subdue Megatron, knocking him out of his alt gun mode. Megatron is so impressed with this weapon's capabilities, the railgun was able to hit him and continue its path/trajectory into outer space. The simple laws of physics deem this totally impossible, but hey, what the hell? It's comics, right? So he stops his assaults and immediately changes course of actions, where he's like, all right, I want this, and in exchange, I will give you all the Cybertronian technology on the Ark. And of course, Cobra Commander is like, yay, I'll definitely sign off on that. And in the meantime, I'll help you rebuild your body. So while this is going on, Starlet is being tended to by a medical Viper. Now, with her loyalty still being questioned, Biggles-Jones comes to her defense saying what more she needs to prove. She just got stabbed by the man she once loved. And also she was left for dead by G.I. Joe. But Scarlet knows that Snake Eyes loves her and he never misses. So on the C-130, after the successful extraction of Destro, Destro tries to console Snake Eyes for what just transpired. Snake Eyes doesn't want to hear any of it because he knows that if it wasn't for both Hawk and Destro, none of this would have happened. He was forced to do it because of them. Now, staying true to form, it wouldn't be Cobra Commander and Megatron if there wasn't any sense of backstabbing. I mean, these guys that's their forte from when we were kids, and it holds precedent here as well. Meanwhile, Destro and the Baroness, the G.I. Joe team, bring them to Cobra Island of all places, where they rendezvous and meet Zartan, and he's in his version 2 uniform. Again, if you're a Gen Xer and you're used to seeing version 1, you're seeing this new Zartan. You're like, who the hell is this? This is not my Zartan. So again, this is another strike that kind of affected the overall story arc. So again, let's take a little deeper dive. Why did Hawk arrange for this old school Cobra leader reunion? It's not for noble purposes. Apparently it was discovered that a perfectly intact brainwave scanner is hidden in behind that volcano. And they know, the other Cobra guys know, that only Dr. Mindbender is the only one to be able to get it to work. And they also know that there is a Dr. Mindbender clone back at the Silent Castle. So there you go right there. And then we just see Megatron unveiling his Generation 2 form. And there we go. We see a Dr. Mindbender coming back from the dead. So we're adding another thing to this puzzle that is turning this into a clusterfuck. So just taking a little break from the action. I mean, here we have Megatron's Generation 2, and I got it next to a Mobat. And I think, obviously when you can put it to scale to a G.I. Joe figure, it's still relatively small. I mean, it's like a car size, relatively. But, put it to a His tank, it's kind of like, the His tank dwarfs it, like, still. Again, to a lot of Gen Xers and even, I guess, kids in the 90s, it just didn't appeal. Like, this isn't Megatron, and I guess people felt detached seeing this. I haven't transformed it yet, but whatever. I got to watch a YouTube video how to transform it. But again, like, it just shows how detached fans were when they saw all of this at the same time. So far, I guess who is bad, who is good is kind of not really clearly defined. I mean, right now, in my opinion, Megatron and Hawk are the two bad guys, and the victims are going to be Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and we're going to see actually Dr. Biggles-Jones is actually a victim in this as well. But that's down the road. But it just reshifts things a little bit. And also, again, seeing Zartan in his version 2 was definitely something that caught old school fans by surprise and kind of dejected, seeing, oh, they messed up Zartan as well. So there's all these changes going on. But again, we have to kind of, like, as we've gotten older and seen all these different versions. I mean, in both G.I. Joe and Transformers, that like initial shock of seeing something different is kind of gone. So we could actually look at this, and there's just so many moving parts in this story that I sometimes feel that if they focused in on maybe 2 or 3 and not kind of like crammed like maybe 8 or 10 that they're doing in this story arc, that it would be a lot better and it would flow a lot better as well. So those are the things at this point that I have going forward. So let's continue. Issue 140, I think, is much needed break from the breakneck speed that we've had so far. And it's kind of like, simmering. So I think this is much needed. We see Megatron taking the Cobra to where the Ark is located in Canada. Now that he's fully into his G2 mode, the title is going south. Again, Batista is still the artist on this arc. Scarlet is recovering in the hospital, but apparently she's known all along that Dr. Mindbender's clone has been sitting there dormant all this time, and that Dr. Biggles-Jones is actually expendable once the revival of Dr. Mindbender occurs. Now, Destro, Baroness, and Zartan make their way back into the Silent Castle, which is kind of redundant. They spent all that time in issue 138 getting the hell out. Now they have to go back in. What the hell is the point of that? But still, that's where the story is taking us. Cobra Commander leads Megatron to a city called Millville, not Springfield this time. And it's actually a place that is totally brainwashed. I mean, everybody's been subject to these handheld brainwave scanners that they put on people. So everybody's obedient. And I think this actually takes Megatron by surprise. Like, wow, this is, pretty impressive that you have these people completely brainwashed zombies. Dr. Biggles-Jones isn't too happy about this. She's like, this is where we get an inkling of who Dr. Biggles-Jones really is. Dr. Mindbender comes back from the dead, and then it's kind of funny. It's like you dropping a glass and a little bit of electricity and kind of like Frankenstein monster. He's alive. Just outside of Millville, Spirit and Mutt are keeping tabs on Cobra's advancements through Millville. They actually contact the rest of the Joe team as they rendezvous in order to save the citizens from Cobra's mind-altering brainwave scanner control. Now, while G.I. Joe is preparing in their Millville assault, we learn that the DoD, the Department of Defense, is also involved in kind of holding G.I. Joe back for some reason. But we know that later on it's because Biggles-Jones is their double agent that's on the inside. This issue kind of sets up a kindred spirit between Scarlet and Biggles-Jones that we're going to see going forward. So up until Snake Eyes stabs Scarlet, they were kind of at odds. So it's a total 360 in their relationship. When the Joes discover that Megatron is on so while Dr. Biggles-Jones is kind of opening her heart to hit the signal, not the Snake Eyes is just rushing there because they've been Transformers gave that Scarlet has been moved to during their short-lived, I guess, kind of like mini he's told series that they had in the 80s, just observation only. So he sees what's going. He's just creeping through the window and checking out. And of course, the transmission goes through, and Optimus Prime gets the transmission from the G.I. Joe team, and they're on their way. All right, so now at this point, I think that the message that's trying to be conveyed is love. Love is able to cut through all of that selfishness and deception. And we see a love as far as friendship coming between Dr. Biggles-Jones and Scarlet, that she is about to open up to her and confess. I know, she approaches Scarlet, I know you're a double agent, Scarlet, tell me the truth, because I have something to tell you. So she's going to tell her so she could open up to her. So you could tell that she's been wanting to do this and she wants out. She's had enough of this. She got her resources to make this gun, but there's some things you can't put a price on. And I think that's something to look at in this crazy series. And of course, the love of Snake Eyes and Scarlet, which we've seen throughout the comic run. I mean, he's doing all of this just to protect her. And he may not have the green light to pull her out and save her, but he's going to do everything that he could to make sure she's okay. Alrighty, so once again, I'm going to beat a dead horse in the sense that we've seen, I think I didn't mention it, is that Scarlet is in her version too. So that's another thing. We see Ninja Force, Storm Shadow is in his version 3. We see Night Creeper Leader, we're going to see him pop up. Like all of these new characters and characters that we once loved and knew appearing totally different. A total disconnection from the Transformers and G.I. Joe that we grew up with and we loved. And we're going to see when the Autobots arrive, you're getting the B team. You're not getting Ironhide. You're not getting Jazz. You're not getting Bumblebee. Heck, you're not even getting Optimus. It's like they send the JV team out to deal with Megatron. And we're going to see that coming in this next issue. And again, it's like, what the hell? And I'm going to point it out now. Brawn should be dead. We're going to see Brawn, because we saw Brawn be the first person to die in Transformers the movie. So to see Brawn, again, you got to understand, like, from the end of Transformers the movie, and we all went and started doing our stuff. If some of us came back upon, because this was like a big kind of a promotion, a last push for Hasbro to kind of re-energize these two franchises. What the hell is Brawn doing there? Anyway, let's continue on. Issue 141 starts off with Megatron behaving like a puppy that doesn't listen when told to sit. He was told to stay in tank mode as to not draw any attention. Now, speaking of which, we all know G1 Megatron is actually a banned toy by the TSA in his Walther P-38 gun mode. So G2 is the first Megatron to transition to a tank mode, and something that continues to this very day, as we saw in the recent War for Cybertron Netflix series. It's also good to see that Tunnel Rat is still the same Tunnel Rat we all love and appreciated. We learned that these updated Cobra Eels, again, another classic troop builder, reduced to looking terrible. They like to apparently hang out in sewers for fun and play with ooze. A not so subtle swipe at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. However, the Eels were able to blow Tunnel Rat's recon team's cover and alert Cobra Commander. While observing Scarlet in the hospital, Snake Eyes, Stormy, and Ninja Force are also discovered by these new Night Creepers. Hawk radios Stormy to go and help Tunnel Rat, but that lame Night Creeper leader in Tiger Pants shows up like some final boss. They let Snake Eyes stay behind to handle him. Now, what goes on is G.I. Joe comic book legend. Now, I tell everyone to read these panels on your own, as this fool literally talks himself into defeat and does his own play-by-play for his own beatdown. It's hilarious. Meanwhile, Dr. Mindbender overhears Biggles-Jones and Scarlet's confessing to one another. I like the fact that a known genius scientist is using a glass propped up against the door to eavesdrop. That's kind of ridiculous. Now, segue to Megatron revealing his true intentions. He wants to extract Biggles-Jones' brain and central nervous system and return to Cybertron to reclaim it and destroy the Autobots. Now, the device that he holds, that is terrifying. It's like a corkscrew, and your brain just goes to like that imagery, and I think that's pretty good. Okay, so at this point of the story, I think we've crossed another important element that got overlooked in our reflection of this story arc, and that is the big important life lesson that deception can only take you so far. That if you're not truthful and forthcoming, that in the end, deception will always bite you in the ass and the chickens will come home to roost, so to speak. I think that is important life, and it's actually a good thing to convey to a young audience, that do that. Deception will ultimately, you're going to fuck yourself over if you do walk down that path. The other thing I think is important is, as we go into the final G.I. Joe issue, again, there's still issue 1 and 2 of the Generation 2 comic series that we're going to touch base on, so we're not done yet. And that is that by issue 142, we saw that Chris Batista has been pulled. They brought in 2 more artists, kind of like the C team. So I'm sure that the sales numbers has had an adverse effect on, and unfortunately, like, the last thing is often the first thing we remember. So this issue in particular, I think 142 that we're going to look at is the reason why we feel the way we do about this story arc. It has the bulk of that feeling, and the artwork is shit, and that's where everything went to shit, and it shows when we cover this issue that it came to a point where it is what it is. It's over with, but still we have to look back on the entirety and going forward. So let's wrap this up, all right? Issue 142 starts with Scarlet escaping from the hospital to rescue a Megatron abducted Biggles-Jones, cementing their new sisterhood. Now, her bravery to even attempt when the odds are so heavily stacked against her, that is definitely just shows what an awesome character Scarlet is. So, as all the negative stuff, that's why we all love Scarlet, and Scarlet is Scarlet. So, as just when we think she's going to be squished like a bug under Megatron's heel, a whole bunch of Autobots shows up. And like I said earlier, it's the B team again, just like with the artwork. Except for Brawn, and we got a Protectobot there. We see one Aerobot. I actually had that one because it's a F-16 Falcon, and I love that plane. But anyway, they start their attack, and Steeljaw's there, one of Blaster's cassettes. Now, I will admit it's kind of cool seeing Megatron literally rip apart these Transformers, used courtesy of the railgun. But man, I think of one character we'll see in a little bit, he just rips the Autobot apart with his bare hands. That is freaking cool. I like how Cobra Commander is on the ground, like, yelling at Megatron, hey, just remember, collateral damage is expensive. Like, Megatron gives two shits about the collateral damage. But it just shows how, like, cheap and, what if a bastard Cobra Commander is. He doesn't give a shit about that. He just cares about his stuff being destroyed. So while the Autobots are engaged with Megatron, Scarlet is still on ground level, taking on Cobra by herself. And of course, Snake Eyes shows up, and, finally we get the love story that they're reunited in battle. It's them against the world, kind of like a metaphor of what's to come when we, towards the end of the run, when they both leave and they go into the mountains and try to get away from it until issue 152, when Snake Eyes has to go back and rescue Storm Shadow. But it just reignites their passion and love for each other. Now, I talked about how the artwork has taken a nosedive. Look at this panel. The way Scarlet looks from far and close up are two perfect examples of why the artwork is so bad in this particular issue. Now, while I have a second, let's talk about the union of Zarana and Cobra Commander. Does it work? Kind of work? I don't know how people feel about that. It's kind of like, East Side guy and West Side girl. It kind of has that type of vibe to it. It works, but then it doesn't. I'm not, it's like a type of situation. I wonder how other people feel about that. Now, Megatron also is displaying his ability to implode neutrons. Now, we know from chemistry, neutrons have a neutral charge. If he was able to do it with electrons or protons, that would make sense. But why put in a neutral subatomic particle is beyond me. And now an important element that's going to continue on is introduced. Spike Witwicky is stowing aboard the Ark on his way, going undetected. Yeah, that's right, Spike is in here. We also see that Dr. Biggles-Jones sees an Autobot make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. And it questions herself, like, if a robot is able to do this, why can't I? And you see her, she willingly offers herself to Megatron in order to save everybody else. Megatron quickly abducts her, boards the Ark, and zooms back into outer space, on his path of destruction, while Scarlet, Snake Eyes only could look on and just like feel terrible about how everything unfolded, thus bringing the end of the G.I. Joe arc. And now we begin Generation 2, issue number 1. So when it comes to summarizing this overall experience, there's no other person better than Chris from Comic Tropes. Now, there's only a few channels that I think are must subscribes, and Chris from Comic Tropes is definitely one of them. Regardless if you're a fan of Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Modern Age, Chris presents things in such a way that it's entertainment and education at the same time. So do yourself a favor after you watch this, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Comic Tropes. And I'm not saying this because I'm a friend, I'm saying this because I'm a fan. And if it wasn't for Chris and his inspiration and becoming friends and being a mentor, I probably wouldn't be here doing this for the community. So Chris, please, what is your take on all of this?
Hello, Shabir, and hello to the wonderful viewers of his channel, codename New2Vero2. My name is Chris, and I host a channel on YouTube called Comic Tropes, where I analyze the history or the techniques of various comics and its creators. So, just so you know, Transformers was the comic that got me into comics originally, and G.I. Joe was the second title that I began reading on a monthly basis. I'm a huge fan of G.I. Joe. I think that that comic was better than the Transformers comic. A lot of that is thanks to its writer, Larry Hama. I believe that he added some realism, some really good character growth, had a lot of fantastic arcs over its run. I love the G.I. Joe comic up until today. But I have to admit, this Transformers Generation 2 crossover with G.I. Joe never really worked for me. Unfortunately, this is my least favorite era of the G.I. Joe comic for a couple reasons, which I'll explain. First of all, the artwork is just not my favorite. This was following Andrew Wildman becoming the regular penciler. And he just didn't work for me. I liked the pencilers who could add just a little bit of grittiness, a little bit of realism to their artwork, whether that was, you know, an established pro like Herb Trimpe at the beginning, or a lot of fantastic artists now that I think of it along the ways. Lee Weeks was one of the strongest, in my opinion. Mark Bright was fantastic. He had a great run. Ron Wagner was really strong. We had some beautiful covers by guys like Mike Zeck. There's a lot of great artwork in the G.I. Joe comic, but in the issues like that started around like 130 or so, maybe 133, I don't really care for Andrew Wildman. And then, for this crossover in particular, that was right after Andrew Wildman left, but they got some lookalikes to draw like him. That said, I do have one interesting observation. Across the 4 issues of this crossover, there were about 3 to 4 different artists. I think that the same artist drew the first 2 issues of this arc. Then there was a guy named Steve Lieber, and then there was some other artist, and I'm sorry that I'm forgetting their names right now, but they all shared the same inker. And I think that the inker was doing everything he could to keep a consistent visual look to Andrew Wildman's work. Because Steve Lieber in particular has illustrated some gorgeous comics like Whiteout from Oni Press. He more recently did a very well-received 12-issue run in the Superman world at DC. It was called Who Killed Jimmy Olsen? Fantastic book. Steve Lieber's a great artist. And I look at this and I don't really recognize his art very well. So I'm going to sort of lay some of this at the foot of the inker for these 4 issues. So visually, not a huge fan. Story-wise, I don't hate it or anything like that. I think Larry Hama does everything he can to make this work. It's a little interesting seeing Cobra and G.I. Joe deal with Megatron. I like his new tank form. I like that Cobra has this relatively new character that Larry created called Dr. Biggles-Jones. She's interesting. She's sort of a third-party infiltrator of Cobra. We don't quite ever get to learn her true nature during these issues, though, because ultimately she gets abducted by Megatron at the very end, and for the rest of the Marvel run of G.I. Joe, which went through issue 155, she never returned. Mr. Hama did bring her back in the more recent IDW continuation of his G.I. Joe run. But she was a little interesting. It's just that that's a loose end that never really gets addressed. As far as the actual crossover between G.I. Joe and Transformers go, it sounds on paper like it should work. I don't think it works very well. I remember before these issues, there was a Marvel G.I. Joe Transformers crossover around 1986, 86 into the beginning of 87. I read it as a kid and I liked it well enough, but I remember that it was confusing in that the events that took place in that 4-issue comic absolutely were referred to in the Transformers comic, but the G.I. Joe comics, it doesn't fit continuity-wise. There are things that happen with Dr. Mindbender and Baroness in that miniseries that would not allow itself to work with what was going on in Larry Hama's ongoing G.I. Joe book. So that miniseries effectively did not take place in G.I. Joe continuity. But then, Larry was basically forced to add Megatron to this story, and they refer back to that miniseries. Continuity-wise, that's a mess. It doesn't really make sense. You have to just go with it. But I just don't feel like it fits that well. So, unfortunately, I don't think that the characters are quite in the same reality as one another. It's as good as it can be, but it's not great. That's just my specific take. If you find it fun, more power to you. And I will say, there is a totally bonkers out there G.I. Joe Transformers crossover comic book that, in my opinion, does work, and that was by a guy named Tom Scioli. That was published, I believe, through IDW. Yeah. And that is a really fun, wild comic where it feels like anything can go because it's not hampered by trying to tie into any specific continuity. It just takes what you've learned through cultural osmosis about Transformers and G.I. Joe and comes up with a totally wild, bonkers idea. For me, that is a G.I. Joe Transformers crossover that works. But this particular one, it felt like it was honestly just a 4-issue road bump in the G.I. Joe story. There isn't a ton going on with subplots, with the minor exception of it's clear that Snake Eyes and Scarlet are getting closer and Dr. Mindbender is brought back. He proves to be an important ongoing character after this arc. That's about all that happens subplot-wise. And my last criticism, and I know this is nitpicking, but the covers of these books, I do not love how they look. They've shrunk the G.I. Joe. Let's try that again. The G.I. Joe logo, they've shrunk to a tiny little rectangle and put Snake Eyes nice and big. Snake Eyes was the most prominent and important character. He was the most popular character is maybe a better way to put it. But that Snake Eyes logo itself, I always felt like that was pretty lackluster. It wasn't eye-catching, but the G.I. Joe brand is pretty eye-catching. And then to add to that, they put the Transformers logo on the cover as well. To me, that's a very cluttered look. It's very clunky. It does not easily catch a new reader's eye when they're looking at the newsstand. Those are my opinions on the book. Hopefully your mileage varies and maybe you got more out of this than me. Thanks for inviting me to participate, Shabir. Cobra Convergence VI continues.
Thank you, Chris. Wow, that was deep and insightful. And again, that's what you get when you're a subscriber and you watch Comic Tropes. I mean, I'm not just saying that as a friend. I'm saying that as a fan. I've learned so much, and it kind of got my passion renewed about comics at the age of 40. So if it works for me, it definitely will work for you. So that's why I think you should definitely subscribe and follow Comic Tropes just because of that reason. So we're going to wrap this up nice and tightly because we still have the Transformer aspects, and we're just going to quickly find out what the hell happened to Biggles-Jones. So let's go to that. So now it's Spike's time to shine. As we saw that he snuck into the Ark, he combines with his old headmaster body, Fortress Maximus. And during the battle with Megatron, this kind of allows his fellow stowaway Skydive to free Biggles-Jones and rescue her. Fortress Maximus decided to destroy the reactor core of the Ark and asked Spike to leave, escape with Skydive and Biggles-Jones. Spike declines and instead sacrificing himself along with Fortress Maximus, destroying the Ark for good. However, not only did Skydive escape with Biggles-Jones, but also Megatron was able to escape as well. Skydive returns back to Earth and brings Biggles-Jones into the warm embrace of Scarlet. And that's the end. All right, so we already heard from Chris, and it holds true, but at the same time, I think that those key elements that I pointed out, revisiting this, it's not as bad as we originally thought it was. There is some good elements in this overall story arc, and I think when you revisit it and seeing what we have seen over the years, it's not great, but it's not as bad as we thought it was. And I think, again, the initial shock of seeing both Transformers and G.I. Joe be radically different, along with the stuff that was going on with Hasbro, that issue 142 that was a really sharp decline, those are major factors. But again, like as an auditor, you have to look in between things to see where the good is. And there is good. It is a compelling and entertaining story that centers around the theme of deception. And also the fact that when the truth comes out, that's when goodness and love can come in. And I think those are the things that were overlooked in the 90s that we could take from now when we revisit this. So again, it's wacky, zany, but at the same time, it was actually fun to revisit this story arc again. Well, anyway, I'd like to thank all the other Cobra Convergence contributors and content creators, as well as you. This is all about us, fans. No corporations, no none of that. So I'm glad that you stuck through it. And again, I look forward to another 4 years of being a part of this wonderful experience. This is Shabu RU. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.